Please become a Patreon and support the show. Merci.
And now our host, Stephen Lee Morris.
Before she was an op-ed columnist for the New York Times, she was an op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times. Before she was an op-ed columnist for the Los Angeles Times, she was a theater reviewer and essayist for the LA Weekly. ERIN AUBRY KAPLAN has been in journalism since 1992. She currently teaches literature at Antioch University. ERIN AUBRY KAPLAN, welcome to Animal Farm.
Thank you, Stephen, for having me. It's so good to see you.
Well, likewise, it's been a long time, and it's such a pleasure to see you again. Last time I saw you was in the theater before the COVID. You were in the theater, and you actually studied theater. This is before your journalism days at LA Weekly, LA Times, New York Times, and all kinds of other places. So you were at UCLA in the MFA acting program?
I followed a time-honored weekly tradition. I studied theater. I was doing an acting degree, actually. Although I always had aspirations to write, but I really also was interested in performing. So I got into this program in 1985 after having gotten a degree in English and not knowing what else to do with myself. But I did want to study the craft, but it was a very interesting experience. Very kind of a very eye-opening experience. I was told by my department advisor that, like we had to audition for plays every quarter. That was one of the requirements of the program of about 10 graduate students. And a couple of times my department advisor said, well, don't audition for the Ibsen play. There's just, there's no part for you. And our audiences expect ... So he talked about audience expectations. And I remember feeling very discouraged, thinking, well, I understand that. That's how Hollywood works. But it's not Hollywood, or so I thought. And I was really disappointed to hear that that I was not useful. I was not the right color. I couldn't be in the shows they were doing. So it felt to me not just wrong. So it was, I guess maybe it was helpful in the end, because I thought I projected all this, and I thought, how am I going to do out there in Hollywood itself? And I really admire actors, especially actors of color, who really have to beat the bushes, beat the pavement, make things work. And I just realized I don't have that kind of, I'm not made of that kind of tough stuff. And so I ended up not really pursuing acting, but I did go back to writing. That's another story that actually has to do with theater, but we can talk about that later.
Okay, so that's the background. So the term systemic racism was alive and well in your graduate education. And it was a manifestation. As we said before we went on air, I was telling you the story. I just watched, as part of a class, I watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the Gene Wilder, that was released, I think, in 1971, directed by Mel Stewart. Sorry?
Which I have to admit, I loved at the time.
Yeah. And it's a film that was filmed in Bavaria, and they wanted it to be sort of an internationalist feel, that it's about all humanity, it's about the whole world. And Willy Wonka puts on a competition that's international. That's the whole idea. So it's inclusive of the whole world. And yet the winners, the people who find these random gold tickets in the Willy Wonka chocolate factories and are thus entitled to enter the chocolate factory itself, they are all from Europe and America. They are all from, there's Augustus Gluck from Germany. There's, what's that horrible English girl? It's just fantastic performance. And so on and so forth, and a couple of really obnoxious Americans. And there's these panning shots. They have the crowd scenes, and all these kids are cheering Willy Wonka. There's not a person of color in the crowd. I'm going, this is the 1970s Hollywood view of the world. It is a white country. It is a white planet. And I'm going, when they talk about system, and this is being transmitted to kids, and when they're talking about sending a message and systemic racism, even unwitting, this film is made by people probably never regarded themselves as bigots, and yet there's clearly an issue there which we are grappling with in the 21st century. And your experience is very much part of that, and you would have gone out into that Hollywood and they would have used the same excuses. So something needs changing, and the question is how. And
I'll say two things in defense of the Chocolate Factory. You're right, but in the original novel, the Oompa Loompas were these little black people, remember? Little pygmies who smiled all the time and were as dark as the chocolate itself. In the movie, they changed them to little white people. So
well, they're green, I think, or
they're green.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. They're not black. Yeah.
Of consciousness to make that change, which racism was rampant in children's books. Dr. Dolittle. We can go down the list.
Yeah.
Books that I read that I didn't know any better. I love these books, but there was very clear racism in a lot of these books by a lot of these authors. Many of them British, many of them European. So there was one thing, and then Charlie Bucket, the hero of Charlie and Chocolate Factory, was this very poor white child.
Yes.
I didn't know there were very poor white people like that. I thought they were all pretty well off. Even when they weren't well off, they were comfortable. It fascinated me that he was so poor that he didn't have enough to eat.
He's eating cabbage water.
Yes, and I will never forget that. I very much resonated with Charlie Bucket. I wasn't that poor. I mean, I felt wealthy by comparison.
Yeah.
So I sort of, I guess, took the elements of the things I could identify with and kept them.
Yeah.
But for 1971, that movie was probably quite advanced, I guess, or there's an improvement on what had come before.
Yes.
Yeah, it's complicated, right?
So lo and behold, a few years later, the theater, the National Theater, and this started, I noticed it around 2015 when I was attending conferences of national conferences of theater, and people were looking around the room and going, it's just white people here running the theater. And this is now, we're waking from a collective slumber. It certainly has not been a slumber for people of color who have been very cognizant of it through the decades, but it is for the white population. And then suddenly we have to deal with this. And the very principles, these are not right-wing zealots. These are not overt racists. They actually do believe, so many of them grew up in the civil rights era, and they do believe in equality and social justice and all those principles. And yet here we are. And that's the paradox. How do we deal with it? And I had sent you a document that's been floating around and being discussed quite a bit this week. It's called the LA Anti-Racist Theater Standards Document. And it is a proposal of how to make substantive change to a system that has proven unable to change itself despite the good intentions of the people in power. But people running theaters, again, are probably better intentioned than most people, say, running the country. So I'd just like if you could weigh in on your reactions to both the content and the ideals of the document, and then its proposed practices of implementation.
Well, I would say, first of all, I just thought of this. It would be better if the whole document came from white people, not from black people or people of color, because then, of course, it's people of color policing white people, which there's always tension there. There's always resentment, and if indeed people, believed in these principles, then implementing them would be the next logical step. But that has proven to be a very hard step, as things just haven't changed. I think I think, and I use this in a very general way. White people really think that believing in equality is enough. It's enough.
Yeah. No.
Therefore, in my mind, it is done. There's nothing I actually need to do.
Yeah.
And I think that the really, and Americans really don't like to do it because I know we're talking about the National Theater, but it's an inconvenience. And Americans as a people hate to be inconvenienced. So this requires us to do something and not just this thing or that thing, but to document, it's what, 10 or 11 pages, or let's say 8 pages. It's a lot of things to consider. But I would say looking over all of them, what it's really trying to get at, piece by piece, bullet point by bullet point, which is so off-putting, the bullet points, is really just trying to shift the consciousness of in this case theater, so that including people, being more, like reconsidering the whole idea of blind casting, which is really oppressive in a way, making theater tickets more accessible so that more people can come, just kind of being more open and sort of recentering theater. That's the norm they're going for. They're going for a new norm, so that we don't, so at some point we don't need these rules. And it looks like social engineering, and it kind of is, because that's the only way, frankly, a lot of white people will deign to change. And even then, sometimes it doesn't work. We've seen it, in other areas like school integration. It really never happened because people were so fiercely opposed to it. Housing integration never really happened because people moved away. So it's just I think asking people to really be more self-aware, and not just that, but to really, first of all, you have to want to change. You have to think as you think. The incredible whiteness of this is wrong, or if not wrong, it's not a good look, or something with you, like, this could be better.
Yeah.
I think my feeling is many people maybe privately think things are just fine the way they are, or I can change it 10%, but that's all I'm going to do. So the real hard problem is the people in control are still in control, and as Frederick Douglass said, power just never concedes things. I'm paraphrasing. Power concedes nothing without demands, and these demands, I think, they're not new, but they are new, I think, in the arts. And I think we will chafe at them because the arts, of all things, should be someone's vision. It's not a business place. It's not a site of government. It's and as you
so this is the core difference between the social engineering for school integration and the social engineering for integrated housing and the social engineering to try to make the arts more inclusive, is that you're going after people's core artistic creativity. You're telling them how to run their theaters.
Yes, but as you know, people can also hide behind their core artistic creativity. And that's the thing. Creativity is sort of anti-rules, right? It just kind of is. So I think what this document's trying to do is expand the imagination of people in theater. Let's look at it as that way. Look at it in that sense. It's trying to expand the imagination, which sounds much better than enforcing diversity rules.
Yeah.
Right, but it truly is. I think that's really what it's trying to do, is expand the imagination, so that, again, we can normalize including people, giving them, I kind of grown to hate the word agency, but that and doing all these things that when you put it on paper, it sounds so heavy and so bureaucratic almost, but really I think it's going for something much different. It's going for something lighter and something uplifting and something good for all of us. Not like medicine, but in terms of our creativity and our mind expansiveness. That's my best read of it. But again, it would be nice if these rules were created by the institutions themselves. On the other hand, do institutions police themselves very well? No, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
look, it's really not, it's not either or. It's awkward. It would be great if we didn't have to do this at all, or people didn't feel a need to do it. But theater has been, we've had this discussion in the past, a very sort of white business um, in terms of the people behind it and the audiences
Mm-hmm.
and all that. So I remember this was an issue for August Wilson, just the whole whiteness of theater.
Yes.
But you know, uh, much of his support came from white audiences and the white theater, industry. So, it's kind of bedeviling, but this is a kind of ask I think August Wilson would approve of.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
that counts for anything.
No, it does. It's very interesting. What about the implementation of it? Do you have any thoughts on that? How you think it's going to play out, or knowing what you know, you've covered the LA theater scene, and you go to plays, and you're so you're not somebody who drops in once a year to see a play.
Right.
How do you see this actually playing out? Knowing what you know of the LA theater community?
I think it really depends on the production. I think it really depends on the project. I've seen, that was one of my favorite parts. That was my favorite part of being staff writer at the Weekly, was doing these weekly theater reviews and just seeing what's out there. Look, this isn't going to work for, say, a one-man show, like a memoir type one-man show about, growing up gay and whatever. I've seen brilliant shows like that are just, they're a one-person story, and these rules, in a way, they just don't apply.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
I've seen, but then I've been to very big houses, where these kinds of considerations make more sense. I've seen mid-sized productions where, people. I mean, I've seen some really interesting choices made in casting in a lot of shows that are really brilliant and that follow all of these rules. They were there. They they were, and they made for really great casting and production and all that. But overall, I would say my expectation, because we're all conditioned the same way, my expectation most of the time was to see a white cast. Not that the play wouldn't be brilliant, but I really started to realize I was conditioned to not expect anything else, and that becomes kind of dangerous.
Had that before? I know we have to kind of draw a line of going to the theater, which ends in 2020. But in the years, say from 2015 to 2020, did that still apply? Because my observation was there was a change actually going on, not in the administration of the theaters, which remained robustly white, but in the casting, that you were starting to see a shift. That's my perspective, and I'm wondering if you share that, because I wasn't seeing everything that's out there.
Oh, I wasn't either, but I think you're right. I think that was starting to happen. So and then we've had this almost 2-year interruption, but I think it was going that way. So, but now with this new, we had a kind of the movement in 2020 after George Floyd. Suddenly people were intensely conscious about what's always been true, which is that there's racial inequality, and suddenly we must do something about it. I think these of course these rules come out of that.
Yes, very much so.
And of course, when you say when a document is about anti-racism, it's it wouldn't have to exist if there wasn't racism, and so you're not going to get rid of it overnight. And I think that this kind of effort is sort of like it's like when you're negotiating something, you put you put your wish list on the table. This is everything we should be doing right now, and I don't think you can expect that'll all happen right now. But you're putting everything out there, and if people do 3 or 4 of the 30 things, or I don't know, 20 things, that is a huge improvement. And hopefully they sort of build themselves, and they all sort of logically connect to each other. Some of them make a lot more sense than others, or seem much more reasonable than others. Though the big issue is when you put sort of this wish list and this really kind of good thing in the form of demands, you know, people kind of naturally resent it, or they're probably not going to immediately say, oh, this is all, I'm going to do all this, I'm tomorrow in my next production, or it's probably not going to work that way.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting.
Attempt, it's the attempt that I think matters. I think that's what they're trying to get going, is just the attempt to do these things will engender change.
Yes.
And as long as people don't quit, as long as they say, well, I did that and I don't have to do that again, if just the attempt can be incorporated into theater, that will expand consciousness, I think.
That's great. I have the final question for you, and that's about consciousness and the larger state of the country. How this movement and this attempt is positioned in the national culture, which is so polarized, and it's absolutely clear from, just from the refugee crisis at the border, from the Haitians being sent back, from we continue to be a nation of tribes that would like to be, some people would like to say it's a melting pot, and we're proving over and over again how that is just not the case. How does a movement like this feed into the national narrative as we head into the midterm elections of 2022, and Trump's probably going to rerun in 2024? That's becoming increasingly clear.
I hope you're wrong about that. Well, it doesn't make any sense at all, does it? We basically have two forces kind of, they're kind of parallel. They're not parallel, but they're completely opposite. One movement, this nativist movement to double down on racism and anti-immigration and very, very openly, and to not believe in fair elections and all of that.
Yes.
Together. On the other side is the anti-racist movement, which is not just about rules like this, but actually kind of excavating American history and looking at shining a light on everything, and going back to the beginning and really, really admitting what's wrong. I mean, these are two very diametrically opposed energies.
They're two narratives. They're two different creation myths.
They're true. We've been saying for many years now, there's no, the middle class is disappearing. Well, economically, yes, but also philosophically, it's disappearing. You cannot sort of stand in the middle and say, well, I agree to disagree with. I mean, this is really about, do we embrace do we sort of accept our history as flawed and we need to change it, or do we just proudly perpetuate it? That's it. There seems to be no other choice. And so I don't know where it's going to end up. It's really that this is where it feels like a real war ideologically, but we've seen actual war. We've seen violence in this country over things like critical race theory. And I could see somebody, convening a rally because, over these rules of theater. Like, people getting very upset about these ongoing efforts to change the, to basically acknowledge that history and to move forward in a different way. There are a lot of people opposed to that, as we've seen, and I do not know how these two things will reconcile, or if they can. That is a great unknown. It's kind of remarkable and encouraging to me, though, that there is this other side of let's do the right thing, let's overcorrect, let's do it like we've never done it before. Let's get uncomfortable. Let's rub people the wrong way in the name of including all of us. That's a very brave thing to do. It's not going to be perfect. People ask me all the time, how do I be anti-racist? I'm like, I have no idea. We're not very practicing it. We have hundreds of you. We are really good at oppression. We've done that really well. But we're not good at this at all. We have very little experience, but we're trying. We are bumbling along at the worst possible moment, or maybe at the perfect moment. And it's where it's going, or where it'll end up. I don't know. Do you have any idea? I don't.
No. This is a very bad time to be a prophet in this country.
Yeah,
Erin,
very bad time to be a pollster, right?
yes, that's true too.
The modern prophets, right? The pollsters.
Erin Aubrey Kaplan, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Stephen. It was great.
Next week, we're joined by playwright and movie producer Sham Bitterman. Sham's work has been produced and developed at theaters across the country, including the Mark Taper Forum, Actors Theatre of Louisville, South Coast Rep, Jiva, Steppenwolf, Sundance, Midwest Play Labs, the WPA Theatre, Padua Playwrights. I could go on, and maybe next week I will.